Welcome back to the deep dive. So far, we've really dug into thinking like a buyer, right? Understanding demand. But today, we're flipping the script entirely. We're stepping into the shoes of the business owner, the seller. And we're zeroing in on, well, what seems like the critical rule that can make or break a business, the rational rule for sellers.
That's the plan. Yeah, this is all about the economics of supply.
Hmm.
We're really trying to map out how a business actually decides, how much to sell. It's a huge decision.
Right. And the core question, I guess, is pretty straightforward, but also really complex. If you know the market price for your thing, your product, how do you figure out the exact quantity to supply?
Exactly.
Mm.
Get that wrong, and, well, you're looking at losses instead of profits. It's
Yeah.
fundamental.
So how do we even start mapping that? Is there a tool for it?
There is. Economists use something called the individual supply curve. You can think of it as like the business's game plan. It's basically a graph, right? It shows the quantity of something a business plans to sell at every different possible price. And critically, we assume other factors are staying the same for now.
Okay, standard graph setup. Price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal.
You got it. Price vertical, quantity horizontal, and the first thing you'll almost always notice,
It slopes upwards.
it slopes upwards.
There you go.
And that observation, that pattern, has a name, the law of supply.
Okay, the law of supply. So in simple terms.
It just means that, generally speaking, when the price of a good goes up, businesses are willing to supply more of it. The reason is pretty intuitive, really. It's about incentives. Each item you sell is just more profitable at a higher price. So naturally, you're motivated to produce and sell more to capture that extra profit.
Makes sense. You can almost feel that logic personally, even without, running a big factory. Like, imagine you're offering tutoring services, maybe specialized tutoring. If people are only willing to pay, say, $10 an hour.
Yeah, after you think about your prep time, your travel, maybe just what else you could be doing, $10 might not cut it.
Right. You might supply 0 hours. It's just not worth your while.
Exactly. Your opportunity cost is too high. But let's say the going rate jumps to maybe $50 an hour.
Okay, now we're talking. Maybe I find, I don't know, 2 hours a week for that.
Right. And if it hits $100 an hour,
Then suddenly I'm rearranging my schedule, maybe 5 hours a week, possibly more. You start pushing other things aside.
that's it perfectly. Your quantity supplied goes up as the price goes up. That relationship, that trade-off you're making, that's exactly what your individual supply curve maps out.
Okay, so that's the overall relationship, but let's went into the mechanics. How does a business actually decide on that specific quantity? I know economists often like to start with a simplified world, right? Like perfect competition. What does that involve?
Yeah, perfect competition is a baseline model. It has two main conditions, and they're pretty strict. First, every single firm in the market is selling an absolutely identical product. Think like basic agricultural goods, maybe.
Mhm.
Wheat from one farm is the same as wheat from another.
Okay, identical goods. What's the second condition?
Second, there have to be loads of buyers and sellers, and they all have to be relatively small compared to the whole market. This means no single buyer or seller has enough power to actually influence the market price.
Ah, okay. So if I'm selling, let's say, identical widgets, and I try to charge even just a tiny bit more than my competitor next door.
No one buys from you. They'll just go next door. In this kind of market, businesses are called price takers.
Price takers, meaning they just have to accept whatever price the market dictates.
Precisely. They can't set their own price. They take the market price as given. Which means, interestingly, the manager's job isn't about figuring out the price. It's all about figuring out the quantity and managing costs.
That sounds intense. How do you even make decisions then if you can't control the price? There must be some kind of rule or principle.
There is, and it builds on an idea we've talked about before. Thinking at the margin, the marginal principle.
Right. Instead of asking how much total should I produce, you ask something smaller.
Yeah, you simplify. You ask, should we produce just one more unit? You break the big decision down into a series of small incremental ones, and you apply the cost-benefit principle to each one of those small decisions. Is the benefit of making one more greater than the cost of making one more?
Okay, and that leads us, I think, to the core rule you mentioned earlier, the rational rule for sellers.
This is it. This is the absolute key.
Yeah.
Sell one more item if the price you receive is greater than, or possibly equal to, the marginal cost of producing that specific item.
Marginal cost, meaning the cost of producing just that one additional unit.
Exactly. The extra cost incurred by making one more. You keep producing unit by unit as long as the price covers that extra cost. You stop when the cost of the next unit would be higher than the price you can get for it.
Okay, but to use that rule, you need to be really clear about what counts as marginal cost. I know there's a distinction businesses need to make about types of costs.
Ah, yes, very important. This trips people up sometimes. You have to separate variable costs from fixed costs.
Variable costs are the ones that, well, vary.
Right. They change directly with the quantity you produce. Think raw materials. You need more steel to make more cars. Or maybe hourly wages for production workers. More production means more hours worked. These are the costs that make up your marginal cost.
Okay, so raw materials, direct labor, and fixed costs.
Fixed costs are the ones that don't change no matter how much or how little you produce, at least in the short run. Think about the rent on your factory building. You pay that rent whether you make 10 units or 10,000 units, or maybe insurance premiums.
Right, those are background costs you're stuck with.
Exactly. And here's the crucial insight for the marginal decision. Fixed costs are irrelevant. They don't factor into the decision of whether to produce one more unit because you have to pay them anyway. They're sunk costs in that moment. They aren't an additional cost of expanding output by one, so they don't affect the marginal cost calculation.
Okay, that's a really key point. Fixed costs are out of the picture for this specific decision. Now, you said earlier the supply curve maps the quantity supplied at each price. And the rational rule says produce until price equals marginal cost.
See where this is going?
If businesses actually follow that rule, does that mean the supply curve is basically the same thing as a marginal cost curve?
You've got it. It's a really powerful connection. As long as the firm is rational and wants to maximize profit, it will choose a quantity where price equals marginal cost. So the supply curve, which shows quantity at each price, is essentially tracing out the firm's marginal cost at each level of output. Observing how much a firm is willing to sell actually reveals its underlying cost structure, specifically its marginal costs.
Wow, okay. But that supply curve, and therefore the marginal cost curve, slopes up. Why does it usually cost more to produce the, say, 100th unit than the 10th unit?
That gets us into the idea of diminishing marginal product.
Marginal product, that's the extra output you get from adding one more input, like another worker.
Exactly. And diminishing means that usually after some point, each additional input you add gives you a smaller and smaller increase in output.
I totally get this when I'm studying. That first hour, super focused, learn a ton. The 5th hour, maybe not so much. The 10th hour, forget about it.
That's a perfect analogy. Your marginal product of studying diminishes. Or think about making sandwiches at a place like Subway or Chipotle. The first worker you add behind the counter can probably make a lot of sandwiches quickly. The second worker helps too. But what happens when you try to cram a 10th worker back there?
They're just bumping into each other, waiting for the toaster, getting in the way. The 10th worker probably adds very little extra output.
Precisely. They might even slow things down. So you're getting less and less additional output, sandwiches, from each additional input worker. Now, flip that around. To get one more sandwich made when things are already crowded, you might need to add more extra effort or time than you did initially. Your cost for that additional sandwich goes up. That's rising marginal cost.
Okay, so diminishing returns on inputs lead to increasing marginal costs for output. And that increasing marginal cost gives us the upward sloping supply curve for the individual firm.
Got it. Right. So that's the logic for one single business. Now, how do we get to the market supply?
Okay, the market supply curve, that represents the entire industry, right? All the sellers together.
Yep. It shows the total quantity that all businesses in that market are willing to supply at each possible price. And building it is, conceptually at least, pretty simple. You just take all the individual supply curves of every potential seller, and you add up the quantities they'd supply at each price, horizontally.
Okay, adding them all up. And I assume the market supply curve also slopes upward?
It definitely does. And interestingly, it slopes upward for two main reasons, which kind of reinforce each other. First, just like we discussed, at a higher price, each individual business already in the market finds it profitable to increase its own quantity supplied. That's the law of supply at the firm level.
Right. Each existing player makes more. What's the second reason?
The second reason involves entry and exit. When the market price goes up, it doesn't just make existing firms want to sell more, it makes the entire industry look more profitable.
Ah, so it sends out a signal.
Exactly. It's like a big flashing sign saying profits here. That signal attracts new entrepreneurs to start up businesses in that market. Or it might encourage firms currently operating in other, less profitable markets to shift their resources over. So you get more sellers entering the market, which adds their supply to the total, pushing the overall market quantity up even further at that higher price.
Okay, so higher prices draw out more quantity from existing firms and draw in new firms. Both push the market supply curve upward. Now, we need to be careful about changes, right? If the price of the product changes and only the price.
Then we see a movement along the existing market supply curve. We call this a change in quantity supplied. The supply plan, the curve itself, hasn't changed. We're just moving to a different point on that plan because the price changed.
Only price changes the movement along the curve. Got it. But we know businesses don't operate in a vacuum. Lots of other things are going on.
Absolutely. This is where the interdependence principle comes back in. A supplier's best quantity choice depends on many things besides the current market price, and when those other things change.
It changes the underlying costs or incentives?
Precisely. It changes the marginal cost of production or the profitability of alternatives. And when that happens, the entire supply curve shifts. The whole plan changes. A shift to the right is an increase in supply. A shift left is a decrease in supply.
Okay, so movement along the curve is just price. A shift of the whole curve is caused by these other non-price factors. What are they? How many are there?
Economists usually group them into 5 major categories. Let's walk through them. Number one is probably the most obvious. Changes in input prices.
Makes sense. If the stuff you use to make your product gets more expensive, like if you're a bakery and the price of flour or butter skyrockets.
Your marginal cost for every single croissant goes up,
Yeah.
right? So at the old price, you're now willing to supply less. Your entire supply curve shifts to the left, a decrease in supply. This is also where things like changes in wages for your workers or energy costs or even exchange rates come in if you import materials. If the dollar gets weaker, imported inputs cost more, shifting supply left.
Okay. Input prices. Factor one, what's number two?
Number two is productivity and technology. This one usually works in the other direction.
Better technology means you can make stuff cheaper or faster.
Exactly. And innovation, maybe a new machine, a more efficient process, even just better management techniques. Anything that lets you produce more output with the same inputs or the same output with fewer inputs. This lowers your marginal cost for producing each unit. Lower costs mean you're willing to supply more at any given price. So the supply curve shifts to the right, an increase in supply.
Okay, so tech improvements are good for supply. Factor three, you mentioned other opportunities earlier.
Right. Factor three is prices of related outputs or other opportunities. What else could the business be producing? This splits into 2 types. First, there are substitutes in production. These are goods that use similar inputs or processes. Like a farmer could use their land to grow corn or soybeans.
So if the price of soybeans suddenly shoots way up,
The rational farmer will likely shift more land towards soybeans because they're more profitable now. This means they'll plant less corn, even if the price of corn itself hasn't changed at all. The supply of corn shifts left.
okay, producing one means you can't produce the other. What's the second type?
Complements in production. These are goods that are naturally produced together. Think about processing crude oil, you get gasoline, but you also get diesel fuel, jet fuel, heating oil, all from the same basic process.
Or like cattle, you get beef, but you also get leather hides.
Perfect example. If the price of beef rises significantly, it makes processing cattle more profitable overall. This encourages producers to process more cattle. But since leather hides come along with the beef, the increased processing leads to an increase in the supply of leather hides, shifting the hide supply curve to the right, even if the price people are willing to pay for hides hasn't changed.
Interesting. So the profitability of one drives the supply of the other. Okay, that's 3 factors. What's number 4?
Number 4 is expectations, specifically expectations about future prices. Sellers are always thinking ahead.
So if I'm selling, say, gasoline, and I hear credible reports that the price is going to jump significantly next week.
What do you do with the gasoline you have in your tanks today? You probably hold back some of your current supply, right? Store it. You decrease supply now, shift the curve left, hoping to sell it at the higher price later. Conversely, if you expect prices to crash next month, you might try to sell off as much inventory as possible today, shifting supply to the right.
Okay, expectations about the future affect supply today. That leaves one more factor.
The 5th one primarily affects the market supply curve, not necessarily individual firms' curve in the same way. It's the number and type of sellers.
This seems straightforward. More businesses in the market.
More supply. If new companies enter the industry, maybe because regulations changed or new funding became available, the total market supply increases, shifting the curve to the right. And if firms start exiting the market, maybe due to persistent losses or industry consolidation, the total market supply decreases, shifting the curve left. This happens regardless of the current price.
Okay, so 5 big shifters: input prices, technology productivity, prices of related outputs, substitutes and complements, expectations, and number of sellers. If we boil this all down, what's the absolute critical takeaway for someone trying to understand supply decisions?
I think the most important distinction, the one to really lock down, is the difference between a movement along the curve and a shift of the entire curve. A movement along the curve that's a change in quantity supplied happens only when the price of the good itself changes, and nothing else. A shift of the whole curve, a change in supply happens when one of those 5 other factors changes the underlying marginal costs or opportunities.
And it all really traces back to that one core decision rule, doesn't it?
It really does. That rational rule for sellers, produce up to the point where price equals marginal cost, is the engine driving all of this. If you can understand how a smart manager thinks about their marginal costs and you know the price they're facing, you can actually start to predict how much they'll choose to supply. And that lets you, as someone watching the market, anticipate how supply will react to changes in costs or new technologies or shifts in expectations. It's a powerful lens.
Understanding supply really means understanding how businesses rationally chase profit. Fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the seller side of the